2024 is turning into a really exciting year for horror. Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. I'm excited about today's episode because we are finally talking about and reviewing the newly released The First Omen. The First Omen is a directorial debut from Akasha Stevenson and stars Nell Tiger-Free, Ralph Ineson, Bill Nighy and Charles Dance, and many other incredible performances. When a young American woman is sent to Rome to begin a life of service to the church, she encounters a darkness that causes her to question her own faith and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring about the birth of evil incarnate. The First Omen was definitely in my top 5 most anticipated horror films of this year. Might have even been in my top 3. I would have to double check that, but I was so excited for this. I have recently, in the last few years, taken The Omen on as one of my favourite horror films of all time. I absolutely adore that film. And so the idea of a new installment in this franchise was really exciting to me. I was equal parts excited and a little bit nervous because we have also in recent years had other legacy sequels and prequels. Some worked well, some less so well, and so I went into this early in the year thinking it's either going to work or it's not. Okay, so I have to start this off by saying that I did love The First Omen. This is an incredible film. It is definitely going to be one of the strongest installments this year, in my opinion. And it is a fantastic directorial debut from Akasha Stevenson. I am so excited to see what else she does in the future. I really hope she dabbles more in the horror genre because it really works for her. Okay, so this is going to be a completely spoiler-free review, just giving you guys my thoughts and opinions on the film, whether I think it's worth seeing and whether I think it's worth seeing on the big screen specifically. So, in The First Omen, Nell Tiger-Free is playing the character of Margaret, our lead character that we are following, and she moves to Rome and she starts to discover this conspiracy to bring about the Antichrist. Now, Nell Tiger-Free does an incredible job in this film. The only other thing I've seen her in is the Game of Thrones series, where she was the daughter of, I've forgotten the name, but anyway, she was in that. So I wasn't really well versed in her work and her abilities. But if you've not seen her in anything else and you see The First Omen, believe me, you are going to become very familiar with her abilities. Nell Tiger-Free should get an award for this performance. It was an absolute powerhouse of performance. She was able to connect the audience with her character with very little backstory, with very little information. You instantly connect with this endearing character. But as the film goes on, not only is she able to convey so much through her dialogue, through her facial expressions, but she also has some physically challenging scenes in which her physicality acting is also just spectacular and mesmerizing. I was so impressed with her performance. I mean, this character holds every scene that she's in. Your attention is on her in both how likable the character is, but also how well she is performed. But she's not alone in incredible performances in this film. I mean, you have some heavy hitting names in this, and then there were some other people that I hadn't seen them in anything else before, but everyone was holding their own in this film. There were some spectacular performances, especially from Ralph Ineson playing this version of Father Brennan, who is from the original Omen. So Ralph Ineson has obviously seen the film, has obviously seen Patrick Troughton's performance of Father Brennan, which was incredible, but he's definitely making it his own. He's not trying to tread in the same steps. He's not trying to emulate this. He's creating his own performance that he can hold his own against Nell Tiger-Free. There is a scene in the film where these two are just talking to each other and interacting, and it is just a wonder to watch. What's interesting about The First Omen is that it does act as a prequel to the original one, and a direct prequel. So it is basically taking you up to the start of the original Omen, but it does feel like a natural partner to it, I would say, for the most part. It feels like a natural entry in the Omen films. Because the original Omen was made and is set in the 1970s, the first Omen has to do the same thing. But I think that it does it successfully. I think that this really, especially in the beginning of the film, feels like a horror film or a horror thriller from the 1970s. And this is because not only of the visuals, but the way that the first Omen focuses a lot on character and drama. It is a horror film, but the focus is definitely on connecting you to these characters, to this storyline, and the drama that is unfolding. And this isn't surprising when you consider that I read an interview with Akasha Stevenson, who said that the 1970s psychological thriller Clute was a really big inspiration for her. She loves how that film is character driven, and it can, delve into the thrill and the horror side, but really you are connecting with its character. I think it's Jane Fonda that's in it, and you're following them, you care for them. And so this was a really big inspiration for her in terms of Nell Tiger-Free's character Margaret. So when you know that, it's not really surprising that you can see that the first Omen is also drama driven. It is character driven. The horror is there, don't get me wrong, we will get on to that, but it definitely feels like a sibling of the Omen or The Exorcist or Jaws or something like that. But as the film went on, I do feel like there were more modern elements put into it, especially when it delves into things like, it's so hard to know what to say, which is going to border on a spoiler. I won't say anything just in case, but there are elements in the film that are perhaps not things that would be addressed or addressed in that way in a 1970s film. It is more of a modern attitude, a modern thing to address and to highlight. So it is both a modern and a classic horror film at the same time. It is simultaneously both things and manages to do things but really well. And I don't think it feels disjointed. I don't think it feels out of place to have either style in. Does any of that make sense? In terms of the story with the first Omen, I think if you have seen the original Omen, or you know the story, going into this, you are already going to have an idea of what's going to happen. You're already going to know the ending of the film. There is only so much that they can do. There is only so much freedom that they have to play with. So while there is that predictability, they do also have free rein to explain the origins of how Damien came to be. The original Omen only really drips a little bit of information, and all of it is never explained. So while they are restricted to a point, they do also have some room with which to play with and with which to put something original in. I liked where they went with the story, definitely the origin of how and why Damien came to be. I think they did a fantastic job with that. It was interesting because there's some dialogue in it from characters explaining certain choices and certain behaviours within the church, and I think that it's definitely reflective of the time of the 1970s, but could also apply nowadays. This is the thing with horror sometimes, is even, if it's a period piece, some of it is still so applicable to us now. So I did love hearing the explanations of how and why Damien came to be, the choices within the church. There is also another level of predictability to it. While I was watching the film, you know how it's going to end, but then within the film before that, there is another element to it where very early on I thought, okay, well, I know where they're going with this. I know what's going to happen. And I don't know, maybe that would spoil it for some people, but for me it didn't, because, the original Omen was never really that twisty-turny. So it feels right that this one isn't either. And I think what you can do instead is, instead of having the mystery element or these big shock twist reveals, there's so much to enjoy in terms of the acting, the story, the visuals, to just let yourself get lost within that without having to be looking too much for the reveals and the twists. And I will say that in spite of it being predictable and what I thought would happen happening, it was still delivered impeccably. I was not disappointed in any way in terms of the delivery of the story. I'm just saying that it is hindered being a prequel in terms of being, restricted. You're going to guess the end. And within it, within the freedom side of it, there is also another element of predictability. Another wonderful thing that is done well in this, considering it is a legacy prequel, we have seen in legacy prequels and sequels recently that they love to do a particular thing and, bring people back. And I don't know. I just really, really liked how the first Omen does connect with the Omen almost seamlessly, but is done in a really subtle, nice way. Enough is done and enough is shown to satisfy you without crossing over into cheesy pie. I think for me, as well as the acting, one of the highlights of this film has to be the visuals. This is an incredibly beautiful film, and the audio is also just as incredible. With it being set in the 70s, you have some songs from the 70s, some disco music, which is fantastic. And then you also have that contrasted with a lot of, I don't want to say religious music, but when there's like chantings and singing and praying from within the chapels and the monasteries and the nuns and the priests. It was like that in Immaculate, where they used the nuns singing and praying and chanting as a diegetic sound. It was within the story, but then as an overlay as well over the top. And the first Omen is very like that as well. And the music and the score was one of the best things in the original Omen as well. And this one is holding its own with that. Kind of a different feel, more of the nun side of it, but it just creates such an incredible atmosphere throughout. But the visuals, oh my goodness. It's set in June. It's a summer, it's hot, it's a heat wave, and the colours of Rome, all the sun-bleached buildings, the yellows, the oranges, really help create that heat to a point of it almost being a little bit suffocating. The atmosphere that it creates is so heavy and saturated through feeling this heat, through the sounds that they're using, and it's just wonderful. But they do make use of the beautiful architecture of the churches and the chapels and the monasteries that they're in. They are often incredibly beautiful structures, painted walls and carvings on them, all very ornate. But also just Rome itself, the streets and buildings of Rome. There are scenes where they're driving through it, they visit a museum, they visit other buildings, and so they're really, really utilising the beauty of this city. But not just the setting of it, but the choice in shots as well. I mean, they're really, really working with mirroring, like symmetry and rules of three, and just some of the framing is incredible. There is this scene where Margaret is praying, and it's quite a close-up. It's like a head and shoulders shot, and she's in her nun habit. She's all in black. And then just behind her, sort of coming out from here, there is a row of candles that just make it feel symmetrical. There is another shot where she's praying stood up, and the camera pulls back and she's framed above her and then sort of below with these candles. But to me, they look like Jaws. That shot in Jaws where the orca is sailing off and you see it through a skeleton shark jaw, and it's like, they're going off into the jaws of danger. It really reminded me of that she's framed by these candles, but it's like teeth surrounding her. So good. Really, really loved either the director of photography or Akash's vision. Just so beautiful. Okay, in terms of horror, because let's remember this is a horror film, as I said earlier, a lot of the focus is more on the character and the drama than the horror. There are plenty of moments in this film where you can relax into it and just see what is unfolding. However, there are also some incredible moments of horror. There are a couple of jump scares, not many, maybe 2 or 3 I would say, and they work quite well. So even if you're not a fan of jump scares, there's not too many. But to me, the scariest moments were just situational, where there's no loud noise, there's no, someone's behind me. It is just a few minutes are unfolding where these characters are in a situation where they're either realizing something or something is happening to them, And that is far scarier. So it's a mix of jump scares with creating this tension, with creating this atmosphere, and within the atmosphere, you really feel that there are, I'm trying to think of the word and I cannot think of it. The only words that's coming to my mind is consequences, but it's not that at all. It just means you are very aware that there is a danger looming, and it feels like anybody is vulnerable to it. Now, I will say that I was very nervous about going to see this film on the big screen, not in terms of will it be good or not, but because I had heard, as I'm sure many of you have had at this point, that this film is quite intense, not only in the atmosphere that it builds, not only in the way it makes you feel emotionally, but also in terms of the gore and the body horror. The First Omen nearly had an NC-17 rating, which I believe in the UK is the equivalent to an 18. Here it is a 15, which I believe in America is rated R. So when you're watching this film, you can see how it almost got that rating. There are some shots in this that will linger in your brain for a while. The gore in some moments is, it's visceral. It's very real and very human. It feels very different to the kind of gore and body horror you would find in Saw. That is such an elevated situation, whereas this has a very human feeling based setting, which can make the body horror all the more upsetting. And everyone in horror has their own triggers, has their own thing that they feel uncomfortable watching on the screen, and for me it is pregnancy and birth. I have my own child. I've done that, and I think that is why I feel a little bit funny about it. And I was concerned when I was hearing the things, pregnancy, birth and body horror in the same sentences. And so, I went in, but I was a little nervous. And there were a couple of moments where I did have to look away. I will be honest, there are doodles in the margins of my notes because I was sat in my chair and I can't look at this. I have to look away. So I was just doodling some little notes. That's not going to be the case for everybody. Some people will be perfectly fine with this. And the gore and the body horror is done really well. It is beautifully done, but it is the kind that will get under your skin, especially one particular scene towards the end, I would say. So the gore is not just in kill scenes either. There are scenes that have body horror and gore that are not just death scenes, but within the death scenes, they were wonderful because there were a couple of them that felt like they were a shadow of kills from the original Omen, and that's what this film does really well. It is very respectful of the franchise it has come from the film. It is acting as a prequel too. There are lots of little Easter eggs and nods sprinkled through that if you are a fan of the Omen, you will love it so much, and it really sets the tone in the opening scenes of, in terms of what type of film it is, but in terms of paying respect to the original Omen. So yeah, lots of little nods, never too much, never too obvious, but just nicely done within the kills and just within bits of dialogue and little things that happen. But yeah, the gore, the kills, the body horror, really effective. Quite visceral. I imagine some people really having a reaction to some of these scenes and them perhaps not being for everybody, but what I was concerned about was that it was going to be like this throughout. I thought I was going to be so tense throughout. That is not the case. There are one or two moments that are visceral, that are really intense, but I think if you feel comfortable just looking away, you can get through it. There are literally one or two, and there are a lot of parts where you can just relax into and get lost within the film. But if you are squeamish or of a very sensitive nature, I would say it's probably not going to be a good idea to watch it on the big screen, because even if you look away, you can still hear everything. And that can still be a lot. But overall, this film, I cannot sing its praises high enough. I think I've given it a 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd and a heart. I'm struggling to decide which I like more between The First Omen and Immaculate. I've seen them quite close together. There's a lot of similarities there, so I'm not sure which I prefer more, but I did loved this as a film. It is a wonderful standalone film. It is a wonderful prequel. It is a wonderful entry in the Omen franchise. And I'm so excited to rewatch it and really be able to take in everything that I missed this time. I would say this one is worth seeing at the cinema because of the visuals and the audio. There are moments in this film that feel epic, that feel like they fit on the big screen. So I would say if you are able to or feel comfortable to, this is definitely one to check out in theatres. So that is my review of the First Omen. Please let me know your thoughts on it down below if you have already seen it. If you haven't, let me know if you are going to check it out or not. Also let me know your thoughts on legacy sequels and prequels, because I do feel like there is a market for them. I'm happy to see them and have them made, but I'm always 50-50 with them because some of them are a hit, some of them are not. But I think that the First Omen has been such a success story that it's shown how well it can be done. If you're new here and you found me through this episode, then please do click the like button if you enjoyed the review and click the subscribe button so you can join the What the Horror family. I have a massive back catalogue of content, and there will be other episodes coming out reviewing new releases of this year, but I will also be continuing with my evolution of series where I look into the evolution of particular characters and particular subgenres of horror. And if you would like to join these names here and get extra content every single week, then there is a link to my Patreon page down in the description box below. If you haven't seen it yet, I will leave a link to my immaculate review at the end of this episode. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.